A lot of times people ask me how it was that I got into real estate, and it's really kind of a unique story. When I was 20 years old, I decided that I wanted to move out of my parents' home and buy my own house. At that time, it was 2007. The environment was a little bit different in the real estate world than it is today. So I started by going to my local bank, Kennebec Savings Bank, which is actually an institution I still do quite a bit of work with today. I went in to meet with them and I said, "Hey, I want to buy a home." And they looked at my finances and they said, "Well, you can qualify to buy a home as long as you buy one that's less than $80,000, which, for those of you listening now, probably seems absolutely insane that you would even find a home like that. During that time period, there were a couple of options actually on the market of homes that were under that price point. Most of them needed quite a bit of work, were not something that I was really excited about living in, but the idea of being able to buy my first place and move out was pretty appealing. So I continued about my search, looking at some properties, met with some really great real estate agents at that time who gave me a lot of really great information to carry with me. And ultimately, I ended up finding a property that was listed for sale by owner. So this is an individual who wanted to sell his own house. And the two of us met. I looked at the property. I was 20 years old again, a reminder. So I really had little knowledge about anything in life, actually, but especially buying real estate. And, I looked at the property and I said to the guy, "I want to buy it." And we agreed upon $70,000 as the purchase price. Now, this property had two electrical meters on the side of the building. It had two kitchens. It had two bathrooms. So I was really pretty excited because I was like, wow, this is an opportunity to buy a duplex, a multifamily building, so that I can rent out part of it and help pay the bills. I still remember what the mortgage payment was on that property, $414 a month. So in my head, I was like, all I need to do is find somebody that can at least pay $500 a month for rent, and that will cover the mortgage on the building. There was a lot of work that needed to be done to that property. It needed a ton of repairs. So I went to the local code officer and I inquired about how I might actually be able to add a third unit. You see, at that time in my life, I was reading this book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and a book at the same time called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Those two books were pretty transformative. And in Robert Kiyosaki's book, he talks about cash flow and how having cash flow is really king. Not what you make for an income, but the amount of revenue that you can generate on an ongoing basis from an asset that is in excess of what the expenses of that asset are. And so with those thoughts in my mind, I went to the code officer and I said, how could I add another unit to this building? I bought a duplex and I want to add a third unit to the attic. And he's like, "I don't know what you mean you bought a duplex. You didn't buy a duplex. This is a single family home." I'm like, "You've got to be kidding me. It has two kitchens, two electrical meters, two bathrooms. It's definitely a duplex." He's like, "Well, at one point, son, it was a duplex, but now it's not. There was a change of use. It was used by the sheriff's department as a halfway house for decades. It's no longer a duplex. It's a single family residence / commercial use is what it's been used for the past decades." I said, "Well, this is really a problem because I was considering renting out that other unit to help pay my mortgage, and I don't know how I'm going to do that without being able to rent that out." He said, "Well, you can apply for what's called a variance, and you can go to the town and seek for them to basically allow you to have a duplex on that location." So here I am, 20 years old, having already bought the first property. There was no way to go back. I already closed on the loan. I was already signed up to be making the mortgage payment. So I went to the municipality and I said, "Hey, look, I need to be able to have a duplex here. Ideally, I want to have a 3-unit, but I know that that's not going to fly. Can I at least have, the apartment that I thought was here when I bought the place? The kitchen's already there. The bathroom's already there. There's no reason why anybody wouldn't have thought that this was a duplex, especially some 20-year-old kid without a lot of information. Kennebec Savings Bank is really counting on me to be able to rent this out so that I can pay the mortgage." So they heard my case and granted me a variance, basically from the code requirement for that lot, allowing me to have a duplex on that site. So, fast forward over 10 years, I had owned that property and ended up selling it to my tenant that lived in there. He was really excited about it. But the reason I bring that up is because when I first called him about this opportunity, he's like, I don't think that I can afford to buy this house. And I said, what makes you say that? And he's like, well, I figured about what the mortgage payment would be, and I don't see myself being able to afford to do that. I'm like, well, have you factored in the rent that you'd be getting from the tenant upstairs, which now was much higher than $500 a month due to inflation over that period of time? I think the 2-bedroom apartment that we had upstairs was renting for $1,200 a month. So when he and I sat down and crunched the numbers on the property, he found out that for just about $60 more a month than what he was paying in rent, he could actually own the building because he could take the rent from the tenant upstairs and apply that toward his mortgage payment, which would reduce and help offset that. So one of the things that I want to talk with you about today, in addition to my story and how I kind of got into real estate, that was the first of many properties that I've bought since then, is this idea of a BRRRR method, BRRRR, BRRRR method, which a lot of people use to get into their first property or to buy their first investment property. You might be listening and thinking, I already have my house, I've been living here for a long time, but I've been seeing and hearing from people that own real estate investments that might be a good place to put some of my money, but I'm not really sure how to do that. Well, the good news is that you can get into buying multifamily properties with little or no of your own money. There are options available out there for a low down payment, especially if it's your first time and you're buying it as a residence that you're going to live in. And for other people, there are private money lenders who exist out there that a return through you and working through you is going to give them a better return than they would get by keeping their money in the bank. So oftentimes they'll lend you enough to buy a property and fix it up, and then rent it out to somebody and refinance it with a bank so that you can pay them off and move on to the next property. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, how the BRRRR method works. The B stands for buy, the R stands for renovate, the next R stands for rent, and the final R stands for refinance. So you really have 4 parts to the BRRRR method. First is to buy a distressed property that needs work. Generally speaking, this is not something to implement on a property that is out of the gate in the exact condition that you hope it to be in when you're done doing some work. This is also a method that does require some kind of a hands-on approach because you need to add value in that building so that when you go to refinance it at the end, you're not having to come up with additional money to be able to go and close. You see, if the bank identifies that there is at least 25% equity in that property, for instance, if it's worth $400,000 but you only owe $300,000 on it, they will do a complete refinance on that building for you without you having to come up with any money. So by finding a property that needs work, let's say you're able to find a property that could be worth $400,000 with the right work done to it, and you're able to acquire it for $200,000. Now, some of you might be hearing that saying, that's not ever going to happen. Let me tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, it happens every single day. The first thing is opening your mind up to it being a possibility and then going out and looking for it. So if you find that property for $200,000 and then you find people to do work on it, let's say it needs a full $100,000 to be worth the $400,000. So you have that work done by other people using private money lenders. You can get that property fixed up and into a condition where then you rent it out. So now you've got a building that maybe the rents were a lot lower on, or the environment that people were living in wasn't really that great. This is an opportunity to step in, bring the building up to modern standards, improve the quality of it, and then get new tenants in there that are paying rents that are probably higher than what was paying before. At the same time, you've created a better living environment for people to live in and an opportunity to do a refinance on that property, pay off the person who gave you private money to buy it with a bank loan, and then move forward, paying down the mortgage with the people who are living in it as tenants. That's more of an investor approach, but you could also do that as an owner-occupied, One of the great advantages to buying a property, a multifamily property, particularly if it's your first time that you're buying, is you can avail yourself of what's called an FHA loan. These loans allow you to buy properties with as little as 3.5% down, and you can buy properties that are up to 4 units in size. So if you've been thinking, hey, I don't mind living in an apartment, but I'd like to be living in an apartment that I own instead of one that somebody else owns, you can buy a multifamily property as your first home. And instead of living in a private ranch on a half-acre lot in a subdivision with a yard to mow and a garage, you may end up being in an apartment in a building that you own, living in one of the apartment units and renting the other ones out. Just like what I shared with you was what I did with my first property at 20. And the reason I did that was because it was the only way that I was going to be able to make all the ends meet. I was working at a job while going through college. I didn't have a lot of resources to work with, and it was a way in which I could supplement my income by having additional rent come in from the apartments that are there. So when you're looking around in the state of Maine, you might be like, wow, there's really no opportunities out there. I mean, right now in the state of Maine, there's over 300 multifamily properties on the market under $400,000. And if you look at properties under $300,000, with up to 4 units, there's over 100 of them on the market right now in Maine. So there are properties available out there. And you might be thinking to yourself, geez, there's no way that I would ever qualify to buy a $300,000 building. Well, an important thing to consider when looking at qualifying for a multifamily loan is that oftentimes the lender will consider the additional rental income coming in on the building toward your qualifying for that loan. So it can, in some cases, depending upon your own financial circumstances, and you need to check with a lender to look at what your situation is. But in many cases, you can qualify for a multifamily property and have that additional income count toward being able to qualify for the loan. And what I want to do is just kind of quickly run through a scenario. There's a great app that I would encourage you all to download. It's free. It's called Carl's, and this is Carl with a K, so K-A-R-L-S, Carl's Mortgage Calculator. And the great thing about this is that you can plug in all of the figures associated with the cost of the home so that you can see how much it's going to run you per month to own that asset. So I put in $300,000 as a purchase price for a multifamily building. Now, if you're able to get an FHA loan with 3.5% down, that would be $10,500 down payment. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have $10,500 to put as a down payment. That's okay. In some cases, you can have those funds gifted to you by others if you have that as an option. There's also some first-time homebuyer classes that are available through Maine State Housing that you may qualify for that can help with down payment assistance. So you can offset some of your other closing costs with that and not have to put them on top of the $10,500. So there are other ways, and if you're interested in learning about ways in which you could help pull that money together, don't let that be a barrier to not moving forward, because there are plenty of resources out there. You just have to have the right team in your corner to get you aligned with those resources so that you can move forward with what it is that you want to do. So a $300,000 property, $10,500 down payment, that means your principal, what you would owe on that building, is $289,500. So if you have a 6.5% interest rate over a 30-year period of time, your payment on that mortgage is going to be $1,829.84 per month. What's kind of interesting is that the average one-bedroom apartment rent rate in Maine right now is $1,588 a month. That's $20 more per month to rent a one-bedroom apartment than it is to actually buy the building with 3.5% down on a 30-year loan at 6.5% interest. To me, it's mind-blowing that more people aren't looking at buying multifamilies as an option, particularly when they're already living in an apartment. So $1,568 a month is the payment. If you add taxes on that, which for the average mill rate in Maine would put that about $5,500 a year rather, and insurance, altogether your expenses are $650 a month. So your total is $2,226 per month. Now, of course, that doesn't include, well, what happens if the toilet breaks, or who's going to pay the electric bill, which usually it can be split up by the tenants to pay their own electric bill. Well, who's going to pay to mow the yard? yes, of course, these are all things that come into play. But let's say that this building is a 3-unit building for $300,000. If you have 2 one-bedroom apartments in there, the average rent is $1,588, but let's be really super conservative and call it $1,300 a month. So now you're generating $2,600 a month that's coming in each month. That's the equivalent of getting a part-time job at $30,000 a year for income. So now you have this $2,600 a month coming in. And if you recall, the total between the mortgage, principal, taxes, and insurance, which are the primary things that are looked at, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, PITI is what it's referred to. The total for that is $2,226 a month. If you put 3.5% down, which is a pretty modest amount, on a $300,000 building with a 30-year mortgage. That means that you're bringing in over $350 more per month from your rental income than what it costs to actually run the building. So the questions about who's going to pay for the heat and who's going to pay to plow the yard and who's going to pay to take care of the broken toilet, it's really a mixture of you as the owner of the building, but also your tenants who are generating revenue for you to help offset some of these costs. So it's very likely that your bills would be less than $2,000 a month in addition to these others, and you could own the home for about $1,600 to $1,700 a month, which in my mind is pretty remarkable when you're considering the fact that a one-bedroom rental in Maine on average is $1,588 per month. It's pretty much in line with what it would cost for you to own the place. And this is the same type of analysis that I did with the person who bought that duplex from me over 10 years after I acquired it. And when we came to the end of the analysis, he was like, this is really kind of a no-brainer for me to just buy the building. And I'm happy to report that now he's owned the building for over 2 years, and I get updates from him all the time. Matt, thanks so much for talking to me about buying this property. It's really helping to improve my financial security. And oh, by the way, here's a picture of my family. I was still able to help them with going through college and help offset some of those costs while I'm building on my financial future. So I think a lot of times people are out there, and the first barrier that you have to buying a property is in between your own ears. It's a mindset shift. Part of it is just thinking, like that book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It's a great book. I recommend you all read it. But he talks about mindset in that book and how part of this journey to buying real estate, particularly with multifamilies, is a thought about mindset. Now, some people hear horror stories about being a landlord. I can tell you, having owned dozens of properties over the last 15 years of my life, that I've had very few occasions in which there's been a problem with tenants. Generally speaking, as long as you as the landlord are taking good care of your properties, then the tenants that you have want to reciprocate that back because they know how hard it can be to find a good quality place to live right now. So it really is a win-win situation. You have good tenants, take care of your properties, you take care of your properties, everybody comes out ahead. And in time, you end up owning a real estate asset that was paid down to zero by folks who are renting from you. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, renting is great for a lot of people. And I would certainly encourage a lot of people to consider continuing to look at renting if they're uncertain about what they want to do with their future living arrangements in the next 3 to 5 years. But if you can see yourself staying in a place for quite some time, it might be worth looking into some of these methods. Either if it's your first time trying to get a low or a no down payment loan for up to a 4-unit building, and instead of moving into a standalone single-family home, maybe you take the next 3 to 5 years and live in an apartment in one of your buildings that you bought. Or if you're someone who's been thinking about investing in real estate, looking at the BRRRR method and finding a property that's distressed, that maybe has for too long gone undiscovered by other people and the landlords haven't been taking care of it. And you can come along and figure out a way to acquire that asset, get it fixed up, and then rent it out to somebody else and refinance it with the bank. And sometimes you can even rent it to the same people that were living there, as long as they know that because you're improving the quality of the building, that generally speaking, some of the rents are going to go up in line with that. And there are many options too, where people own the buildings, they don't have any mortgage. This is particularly common in Maine. And they're willing to owner finance that building to you. So you might be like, geez, I don't mind being a landlord. I want to own a building, but I don't really have great credit. That's not a problem. I mean, if you can find a landlord that has their building paid for and you go to them and say, hey, look, I'm willing to pay you, 7, 8, 9% interest on that building that is now pretty much paid off. And now you're not collecting depreciation, so they don't have as many tax offsets, and they can sell it to you with an installment contract so that you make payments to them just like you would to the bank, except you're the owner of the building now. That's another option to look at as well. So I wanted to do this debrief on buying a multifamily in Maine and some of the advantages that there are. And a lot of times I think people just don't really consider this as an option because they're not sure how the finances are going to work. But if you're interested in learning more about that, we do this every day for folks, and we'd love to talk with you more about it.